Disclaimer. To the Pharisees and Karens out there.
How dare you!
All guests on this show do not reflect the opinions of the host. The purpose of this show is to have interesting conversations, stretch our minds, and grow.
Not what we want!
If you are looking for an echo chamber, viewer and listener discretion
is advised.
You talk about extreme.
What is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we're about to fill it up.
Torches high.
Look at it from a different perspective.
Hey guys, what is happening and what is up? Hold out that glass, baby, because you know what time it is. We about to fill it up. Welcome to the Prometheus Lens Podcast, the place where the conversations are always enlightening. I am your host, Doc Brown, and here we like to use the allegory of the Prometheus Lens to take a second look at everything. If you're new to the channel, welcome to Hero's Journey. Be sure and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Be sure to check out our banner below with all of our social medias at their various platforms. That would be much, much appreciated. But hey, man, I got a really good show for you lined up today. We're going to get into some true crime. We're going to get into some dark occult, ritual type stuff, little SRA. This is so put your seatbelts on. And if you do have little ones around and you're listening to this on your Bluetooth speaker, you might want to wait till you got some alone time or put your headphones on for this one. But I'd like to welcome to the show this man. I met him at Bro Grove. We got to hang out. We shared the stage together on a roundtable discussion. We actually hung outside and had us a smoke or two. And back when I was smoking, forgive me, Lord. But I really enjoyed this conversation with this guy, man. But I'd like to welcome to the show, first of many, Austin Picard. Man, dude, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to hang out with me.
Yeah, of course, brother. I'm sorry that I had to reschedule on you at least once, but man, I've been trying to collect myself, honestly, just as far as, when you cover some of this, it feels like I almost kind of, for one, it obviously takes an emotional toll, but I think these sort of just connections are so sophisticated and deep in the layers and levels of kind of the, in my mind, how many of these networks function that I investigate. And so under the umbrella of my show, which is called the Underclass Podcast, obviously I started that in, I believe it was April of 2023. So it's still very much, I feel, in its infancy, right? And to me, that's another aspect of all of this. I'm trying to kind of balance, just the delicate balance you play, right? With kind of, when you expose yourself to a lot of the details and involved in some of the darker aspects of society at large and how it kind of functions in this current power paradigm, you begin to, people have described it as the black pill, but I very much pivot away and steer away from that because I think there's so much hope to be had. And I think the issue is just being able to manufacture a sort of defense mechanism and put it in its proper place to where you can engage with at least you understand the sort of current media environment that we exist in and what seems to be this sort of fundamentally it's these mind manipulators engaging in socially engineered misconceptions and false narratives to kind of like, in my mind, always it almost falls within the framework of modern Mockingbird because I don't believe Operation Mockingbird ever ended as far as this major influence to undermine and compromise the major media publications and outlets to sort of become the voice boxes of the permanent establishment and the intelligence apparatus that, remains just oversaturated with individuals who are in no way voted into power, right? There's no sort of accountability to be had. And I think that's a major issue that I came to terms with. And to me personally, I felt like the only way forward was to have some sort of avenue and outlet to one, voice my sort of frustrations, but not to linger and dwell on the negative aspect of how much this, obviously, the consequential nature of the these dystopian agendas obviously affect us in a negative way. But at the same time, what I love to prioritize is these beautiful conversations, these open-minded, objectively, just willing to engage in a way to where, like we were just discussing privately, there's no real concern of just offending someone over a theoretical concept, right, of some kind, or even just a belief that you hold true to your core principles. Like, it seems like in this current environment that we're residing in, there's far less of that we have to concern ourselves with, and we can actually set that all aside and then pursue this kind of, at the very least, collaborate in an effort to objectively pursue the truth. And in that, I've been discussing with, like, each time I go on with Top and Raven on NDS, and we talk about essentially through objectively pursuing the truth, I personally have felt as if I find God in that effort. And that in itself is like, I don't know, I've never in my life felt more, honestly, as if I have to make a legitimate, it's just spiritual terms that you have to kind of utilize in as far as trying to interpret this current environment, right? And it takes time to get there, but once you become willing, and at least for some people, right? But once you become overexposed and you realize that, it's impossible to explain some of this without, understanding this additional layer to life itself, and the ethical, I think the crucial moral values and ethical, philosophical perspective that you should attempt to embrace, you can only sort of find through that process. And so anyway, I just personally, I'm on this path where I feel very grateful. I feel like I'm trying to at least surround myself and engage with people who are not only like-minded individuals, and that doesn't only mean that we're trying to confirm our own bias or whatever. I think many of us, don't necessarily agree on every level with every single last detail in terms of a lot of these things, but that doesn't necessarily mean we disagree either, or we're unwilling to at least entertain the idea or concept, and that in itself is beautiful. I think it's something worthwhile, and I'm very proud to just be a part of conversations like this, because again, it provides us with an avenue to just shed all of these moral taboos that are essentially kind of tied to many of these subjects in terms of just even breaching the conversation. There is all of this sort of conceptual baggage in place. And I think it's all by design, right? Manufactured in order to keep people away, to push them away from engaging in these lines of investigative thought. And it's an effort to
segregate us,
Exactly.
To segregate us, keep us in their little boxes, and not, come together and talk about these things and flesh these things out and discover the truth. Any good military leader will tell you divide and conquer. And I completely agree with you. And I don't know if they're still my listeners, but some of my listeners in the past have given me a rough time for some of the guests that I've had on my show. I've talked to people of various faiths, people that were atheists. They were, formerly in the occult, and some of the shows I go on and stuff too. And I try to tell people, I have a show and I happen to be a Christian, but that doesn't mean that my show is a gospel preaching church. I'm here to have intelligent conversations with people, and to get their perspective on things, that I don't necessarily have. And I always tell people it's kind of like gathering puzzle pieces. I like to talk to the people, get different perspectives, and I might not agree with 90% of what somebody has to say, but that 10% I find that I agree with, and it's very valuable, and it was a missing piece that I had. So we have to go out and have these conversations, and like you said, just be able to listen to each other, exchange ideas, and the very least respond with, that's interesting. Yeah, I never thought of that. We've lost that. We segregate ourselves, and we want echo chambers. We want to surround ourselves with people that think like we do, agree with everything that we think about, and you're never going to grow. You're never going to learn anything that way. And if you happen to be a Christian, when I have these conversations, more often than not, I always walk away from the conversation with another puzzle piece to throw in my evidence pile, and it does nothing but solidify my faith, man.
Yeah, I think at least as long as individuals are acting in good faith, which I think is, that's when I'm very willing to engage and have a conversation. But like, that's what I've attempted to learn over time is like, there's a place for that. I personally don't find it valuable to kind of engage at a level to where it's like, there's controversy over, I feel much more like you can have a constructive conversation and still disagree and remain right, just cordial within that context. And I think that it's interesting though, because for me personally, I just think we've all been sort of socially engineered to embrace these new age esoteric values in regard to the inverted moral landscape that's been very well orchestrated around us and in a way to where it's hard to even engage with reality itself or just pop culture and things of that nature without being entirely overexposed to that line of social engineering and psychological control. And it's I think it's just another avenue and branch of the overall agenda of mind control and creating this just extraordinary level of compliance for the general public to consistently fall into the trap of obviously believing in the overall collectivist nature of the philosophical framework that they utilize in terms of how they engage with reality itself. And I think that's a huge mistake because, but this is just my opinion. I think through isolating and as far as like understanding and isolating and firmly like pursuing the ability to define the core values you uphold and you live by these ethical values, only through that process can you then become some sort of net positive for the overall collective, right? So I just think that should always be the goal, is pursuing prosperity in the terms of your own family and the people that you can have a direct effect on. And even that, it's like, be careful of what you expect for yourself, because you can't intellectually think for others. You can't sort of hold their hands down that path. They'll usually slap your hand away and be a little upset that you're pushing them in a direction, and they're going to have to come to those terms on their own. Like I've realized that over time. And
Plato's
I think that's
allegory
important.
of the cave, prime example.
Exactly. And I think that's a beautiful example, because it's so very important to remember what is most important, what we should prioritize, and what we can control. And it's the serenity prayer. It's almost become a mantra of mine recently. Just, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And like that in itself, I'm such a control freak. I want to control the outcome in every way. I'm obsessed with, I want to do well and I want to improve at every level of my ability to have conversations and present information that I think is crucial and important and something that I want to present in the right way. But yet we're always going to have our own failures and character defects that, but as long as we're attempting to improve them, I think that is when you're on the right path. Because if you're hyper aware, that can become a detriment. It can become self-defeating in a way. And I think that I have proved that to myself. You know what I'm saying? But it's only natural, I think, if you truly want to improve and become a better person, and you have to identify and acknowledge your character defects and what led you to making certain mistakes. And that's the only way you can, redirect yourself and just achieve some sort of self-improvement at a level that is worthwhile. And those are the people I want around me, right? People that are seeking that path. There's no perfection in this. It's just like, you know what I mean? It's like, as long as we're all trying to bring the best out in each other through these collaborative efforts, then I think we're doing something that is at least on a path that is very worthwhile. And to me, it provides me with a purpose, right? But it's a purpose I'm very passionate about. And that's what I'm very grateful for more than anything is that I'm having these conversations with people who kind of share that passion, and that in itself, I think brings the best out in each other and people when they sort of pursue that and engage in that way. And so that's why I love, Bro Grove. Like, it was such a beautiful thing, and being surrounded by like-minded individuals who were so, eager and willing to learn and engage at a level to where we can each, share things with each other that we might not necessarily have pursued, on our own, because we all think differently. We come together, and what we bring to the table is just, I think it's a uniquely different perspective. And that's just kind of the human condition at play in a way, but it's beautiful to witness. And that was my first, kind of just live event experience that I had been to, as far as since I had started the podcast.
Nice.
I hadn't been to anything like that. So yeah, it meant the world to me, and getting to meet like Top and Raven and see Donut and, like, you know what I mean, and Thomas and meet you as well, obviously. But it was just like every aspect of it was kismet. It felt like it was meant to happen. And there was a moment where, I was just looking around and appreciating everything. You know what I mean? Like it felt like it was something very special. And yeah, it breaks that digital veil where we're these anonymous personalities in a way, right? It's and I personally, obviously, like I wear my heart on my sleeve in a way. I didn't take the precautionary measure of of keeping a sort of like pseudonym or anything. So I am who I am, and unfortunately, but I think that's a good thing and a bad thing. But at the same time, it was very important to experience that, right? As far as Bro Grove itself, because again, it's like getting to see Sam, kind of like I got to do an in studio appearance with him on a podcast during the weekend. It was just a lot of fun. It felt like it was something, that it was very important to me. Something that I had. It was kind of a dream in a way, right? And those things are just beautiful whenever they come together. But yeah, it was just, again, it broke that digital veil, and it at the very least confirmed to me, that these people, certain individuals who, I just wanted to meet them, shake their hands, get a sense of who they really were as people, were acting in good faith, and they had beautiful intentions, right? And man, that inspired the hell out of me, right? Like, so it definitely did. And so I continue to talk about how just what a good experience that was, and I hope that we can continue to do that going forward, obviously, and build more of those, those kind of live events, because I just think it's going forward. It's going to be really important for us to just have some sense of community, in a way.
It's something that's lacking in this community, honestly. Like me, I'm in the, the Christian fringe community, and they have lots of conferences, and I love them. I enjoy them. I try to go to at least 2 or 3 a year, and it's the similar as you were talking about with Bro Grove. You get with, like-minded people, and they're kind of conspiratorial and look at the supernatural side of things. So yeah, you get to exchange those puzzle pieces with those guys. But one of my big complaints with it is, it's usually the same old song and dance. It's usually the same speakers every single year, and they're great speakers. I love them, but it's like, I may love ribeye steak, but if I eat ribeye steak every day for a month, you know what I mean? That doesn't take away that steak is amazing, but it's, man, I'll take a greasy cheeseburger every once in a while.
Right.
And so it's like, I wish that at least that community would involve, younger speakers and have some variety and bring in the podcasters and, give them a platform to speak and network with each other. And that was just really awesome and refreshing to go to Bro Grove and just to have all the younger generation and the podcasters. And so that, to me, that was just really amazing. And that's something that is really, really lacking in some of the pools that I swim in. So maybe I'm just going to have to take it upon myself. I've talked about it all the time about doing, some conferences, and this is how I do it. I do this, this, and this. So maybe I just got to get off my butt and actually do it and just make it happen if nobody's doing it.
Right. Hey, I think that's great. Honestly, I had a patron hit me up and kind of like pitch that very idea. Right. I think it's something that it's very much, there's an appetite for it at this moment. And I think it's also because it's the reason I started my show. I felt so isolated in my ideas and I wanted to have an avenue where I could have these conversations, and this has provided that. And I think there's an extra element that is very much, I think it's sort of, there's a huge appetite to meet with these live events and try and actually, like, I think people just appreciate that same energy that we explained earlier, right? Because again, it provides you with like hope for the future, inspiration going forward. We're not alone. Like, these ideas are clearly, being shared and spread, and people just have a desperation to engage at an honest level. And that, again, it just reinforces the notion that there is this sort of just very much willingness to objectively pursue the truth. And through that, it's like you shed your political, ideological prison that has been kind of like injected into your conditioning from day one. I mean, it's like if it wasn't your parents' influence, directly, it became your sort of public school slavery influence, right? And throughout that process, we all are conditioned with the pop culture that we engage with, and various kind of false idols that we accumulate over time, and then we wonder why we end up in certain positions when we mold our lives and personalities after it. It's like all of us really are engaged in some sort of identity crisis in a certain way. And we have to acknowledge that.
Break that chain too.
Exactly.
I think of Emerson. What did Emerson say? He said, consistent foolishness is the hobgoblin of the little mind.
Right. That's so perfect. Yeah, that is beautiful. And yeah, that's perfect, because it just explains, honestly, it is this, it's the reason why Hollywood is so, as far as utilized as a tool to exploit and leverage the average person into these compliant, ideological prisons. And then they sort of just, it's like a chameleon in a way, you become the version of what it's very strange how celebrity personalities are very much worshipped in this sort of modern framework. And again, I think it's crucial in the terms of this, new age esoteric ideological system of control that has been created to sort of fill the God hole that so many people are desperately attempting to fill, unbeknownst to them. I think it's a subconscious effort. And obviously, it's a part of the human condition. And whether you like it or not, you're worshiping something. And I think that people need to understand that you might be subconsciously engaging in that worship, but something is controlling you. And at the very least, you're being lured into this submissive psychological state of mind to where you kind of like fall into these these very traps that have been laid to corrupt you into embracing that very inverted moral landscape that is there to, I think, facilitate these new age ethical moral values that are clearly just almost it's sort of it's inverted. It's the ethical opposite of what you should pursue in every way, and yet it's been couched in this sort of positive framework and this new mindset to where people are embracing it as the way forward. Exactly. So I don't know. Personally, I'm under the impression that it's like I ask, whenever people come on the show, I usually ask them, like when William Ramsey came on the show, I asked him, like, what is your sort of thoughts on the intersection of culture creation, social engineering, covert intelligence operations, and this sort of esoteric occult ideological or ideologies that are essentially being initiated through the subconscious mind of the general public, who are essentially, I think there are various methods of deception being utilized through symbolism and occult iconography, right? And I think that that's a major aspect of it as well. And that came up in multiple just episodes that I've covered, especially the Son of Sam case and the the children and the 22 disciples of hell. And they were essentially committing ritualistic sacrifices outside of various nightclubs. One was called the Elephas Club. So it had like occult symbolism tied into the name of the club itself. And that, to me, it played into the layered symbolic nature of the ritualistic sacrifice, which would be
what
conducted.
Is Elephas?
Elephas Levi, like this, essentially, it just refers to this sort of Kabbalistic, ancient, esoteric, and in a way, Elephas Levi was basically just one of the he basically helped push forward an occult ideology, right? And in many ways, and I think helped with the new age infrastructure that's been laid in more ways than one. And many of his teachings have been, pursued and upheld in the occult community. And so it fits into like the Rosicrucian mission that was allegedly the foundation of America, is that we were essentially we were tricked into this false belief that it was really about this city upon a hill. And in reality, it was a Rosicrucian mission to create what would become sort of the ground zero of the new age and the occult path, which they would pursue in sort of the age of Aquarius and bringing forward.
Manly P. Hall talked about that, didn't he? He was it the secret destiny of America, and the pentagram laid out in Washington, D.C., and the phallus and womb, all that stuff, man. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Manly P. Hall, he won the secret destiny or the sacred destiny, right? What was it? Yeah,
it was the secret destiny of America.
Of America. Yeah, it's fascinating. Honestly, that is David Livingstone. It is I think it's a pseudonym, but either way, he has a great website. It's Ordo out of chaos. Basically, it's Ordo ABKO. And it's essentially just the you already know the Freemasonic nature of order out of chaos and this sort of but. Either way, that's the name of his website, and he has some wonderful primary source material that he provides in terms of the Rosicrucian mission and the secret destiny of America, and how it essentially was this false framework, and that obviously American history and history itself is just, what did Napoleon say, allegedly? He said history is a lie agreed upon, or a fable agreed upon, something to that effect, I believe was what he claimed. And yeah, that's definitely the case as far as recorded history is concerned. I think it's been a sort of a fairy tale intended to, place us on this compliant path to where we're willing to embrace the structured, systematically entrenched, like sexual blackmail, cycle that exists as far as NDC. If you're considering just the what I view to be like the ultimate currency in DC for far too long, generations, has been basically sexual blackmail and human compromise and various forms of it. But it does seem that the more sinister you are or sadistic in nature, you rise to power, and basically, it's very interesting because I think that you can trace this back to even when I covered Watergate. I didn't expect it to lead me down a path to where I would discover the fact that it was a Columbia Plaza prostitution ring that was attached to the
Whoa.
The Watergate complex was essentially the desk. Ida Maxey Wells was the desk that was being broken into at the Watergate complex.
If you're someone who still thinks the wild has secrets, who feels stories woven into the wind, this brand's going to hit home. The Soul Squatch makes Squatch-approved gear. And I don't mean that lightly. This stuff is functional, yes, but it's laced with legend. It's for people who believe in what's out there and what it brings out of them. They're hats, beanies, stickers. They're designed by folks who live and breathe the myth. No gimmicks, just real outdoor gear with soul. Go to thesoulsquatch.com and find something made for fellow believers, wanderers, or anyone who still listens when the woods go quiet.
And she was the contact for the prostitution network and the ring that had been set up 2 blocks from the Watergate facility, where these prostitutions were being offered up to foreign diplomats and various politicians who would come into DC, because the DNC, the DNC was actually housed in the Watergate complex at the time, and they had a private phone system that wasn't on the overall communications network, telecommunications network. And so this was the system on Ida Maxey Wells' desk where they would be sent to, because they believed they were privately communicating, and they would be offered pictures of the prostitutes and kind of make their decision. Then here's the phone number you call. Then you can have a conversation with the madam and kind of make your order. And it's very interesting. But it turns out that one of the White House aides, named John Dean for Nixon at the time, it turns out he was married. Well, he just conveniently, the timing's very convenient. During the Watergate scandal, he gets married to Mo Bynardine, which became his wife, and she was the best friend of the woman Heidi Reichen, who was running the Columbia Plaza prostitution ring out of the Columbia Plaza apartments, right? She was known as the White House call girl. And that's, she was basically, she was exposed later on as being a setup by, she claimed she was being protected by CIA, but it was because the CIA were running this operation through the mob. And their mob connections with this individual mob figure known as Joe Nesline, who was basically running this prostitution operation on behalf of the CIA for plausible deniability purposes. It's and it's just crazy, because if you connect Heidi Reichen, you find out where she comes from. She's an immigrant from Germany, and her father was a Nazi SS U-boat captain. And so you got Operation Paperclip that sort of lingering in the background in terms of this prostitution network and human compromise operation. And it's very interesting when you look into all those connections, because there's claims of a pedophile network being involved as well, and that there was far more, legitimate blackmail that they were attempting to procure to see who was on the. Basically, they were trying to see who was on the call list implicated in procuring the prostitutes, and mainly because
did that list disappear too, like the Epstein list?
Absolutely, and yeah, exactly. And who. It's so crazy as far as the claims that were made surrounding all of that, to me it makes a lot of sense that was the case. Obviously, as far as just once more you're witnessing human compromise and sexual blackmail play out, but it was a layered operation, and you had CIA operatives who were retiring for the 3rd time and working for CIA cutouts during the time that they could access the Watergate facility. It's very crazy, but it goes to show the clandestine hidden hand involved in every aspect of how society functions. And I discovered whenever I investigated the Finders cult, I honestly, I never expected to discover what I did in terms of like a state-sponsored intelligence operation that was conducting child sex trafficking. And essentially, legitimately, it seemed as if it was far more sinister than that, because they were infiltrating child care organizations and essentially laying out instructions of how they could, move the children through various jurisdictions to keep the authorities off the trail of some of their properties where they would house the children in cages and things of that nature, which is terrible to see. Who the main founder of the Finders cult was. His name was Marion David Petty, and his wife.
Just for those that's unfamiliar, I don't want somebody jumping in midstream and not know, because I'm one of them, if I'm being honest. The Finders Club. What is that exactly?
Man, it's fascinating, because basically the official narrative is that it's essentially this new age group, right? That basically kind of like they were trying to present themselves as a hippie commune that was essentially trying to. It was ridiculous how much they would deflect away from certain allegations and claim like various aspects of like animal sacrifice and ritual, animal blood sacrifice during occult rituals was then like explained away as animal husbandry. They were teaching the children about animal husbandry, but in reality, they were all dressed in white sheets and robes and committing a legitimate satanic blood ritual. But it was tied in at the same time, or around the same time as the McMartin preschool case was becoming public. And so basically that is around the time they come into public awareness, is around 1987. There's an arrest made in Tallahassee, Florida. And it's very strange to me, because I think of course, the fact that this is peak satanic panic at this time. Right. And again, I consider this to be a sort of manufactured media trope that was intended to seed a plausible enough cover-up narrative into public consciousness, while all of these legitimate examples of with real evidence of satanic ritual abuse continued, and so it was around the exact same time that the Finders cult become exposed, that McMartin preschool sexual abuse scandal. And that investigation was taking place from 84 to 87. And then in 87, the arrests happened with the Tallahassee, Florida arrests for these alleged members of the Finders. And the way that it essentially takes place is you have these individuals on February of 87. There's an anonymous phone tip sent to the authorities and basically called into the Tallahassee police, and it reported 6 children dirty, hungry, and acting like animals in the custody of these 2 well-dressed men in a Tallahassee, Florida park. And and instantly there, as the story unravels, like you consistently see this line of satanic ritual abuse, international child sex trafficking ring, and it was all initially confirmed and then later denied, I think, and that all happened based on the facilitation of the cover-up, because it was traced back to these very high-level individuals. I won't get off on a tangent, but the Confessions of a DC Madam is another example of this, because it perfectly aligns with the Franklin scandal and this case, the Finders cult. And so the Franklin scandal is the Franklin Credit Union in Omaha, Nebraska, which was, there was a major embezzlement scandal that was exposed, and Lawrence E. King was a major part of this. And he sang the national anthem at the Republican National Convention in like 1984, right? Mm. And this guy is a sadistic pedophile rapist that legitimately was running a child sex trafficking operation through and laundering the money through the Omaha, Nebraska Federal Credit Union, and basically had an operation set up with the Boys Town orphanage, unfortunately the boys facility where a lot of these children were being not just that facility, there were child care organizations involved and essentially much more than just Boys Town, but they were procuring children from this obvious institution with state funding,
and orphans are the best ones because they don't have family or something to notice when they're gone. They're
exactly.
And even the cold-hearted government officials can be like, well, we're lowering the overhead of the system. That's a few less mouths to feed and this, that, and the other. And even modern day, call me conspiracy theorist if you want, but during the Obama and Biden administration, they were separating the parents from the kids and putting them in these cages. And then it was just a few years ago, they were talking about just all the missing children. There was almost like close to like 100,000 kids or some kind of crazy astronomical number that the kids are just missing. And why would they open the borders? Why would they say, come on, and bring them all in and then separate the parents from the children? Because I think the stuff that you're talking about is at play here.
Same with what happened with Ukraine as a destabilized nation in this moment due to foreign policy reasons. It's like it became the child trafficking hub, not just child trafficking, human trafficking hub of the world. Like it's allegedly, according to statistics and various data sets, Ukraine, since this major conflict has occurred, has become the world's hub of human trafficking. Of course. I mean, that's natural when you have a failed state. But at the same time, it's like when you see the direct influence of the intelligence apparatus at play, and then you're well aware of the fact that unfortunately there have been, diabolical connections directly made to intelligence operatives facilitating and not only facilitating but covering up, legitimate human trafficking operations that have sadistically abused children as well. And then you also realize that in terms of the overall scope of the enterprise, what they are ultimately pursuing is far more sinister than just human trafficking or even child sexual abuse, which is terrible to even imagine. But there are layers deeper than darker than that are being pursued, and organ harvesting. I mean, at various levels of, things that people wouldn't like to even imagine happening in terms of snuff films and ritual murder happening on film, because the Dutroux network is a great example in Belgium. And what happens if you age out of that network? You're ritualistically murdered on film. And then they distribute that snuff film to sinister pedophiles through pedophile publications that have been, they're underground and they're covertly facilitated and distributed, but they exist. The Hermes publication is one example of that. And Padika magazine, that's another, that's a legitimate pedophile magazine, right? Like, there's a crazy, it was a bulletin NAMBLA bulletin, right? The North American Man-Boy Love Association.
Oh my God.
Talk about an organization attempting to normalize pedophilia. They're claiming that they should be a protected class, that they just love the children, right? And they want the best for the children, and they're concerning their legitimate welfare. But it's fascinating stuff, because Paul Benassi claims this is very crazy. He says in an interview, there's an interview given in 93 to Paul Benassi, who's a victim of the Franklin scandal, right? He's, if people aren't aware of who Benassi is, he comes up in the Franklin scandal, and it's upsetting because clearly he's one of the alleged victims. And he alleged that he was sexually abused as a minor in Nebraska and around the country, where he was flown by Lawrence E. King, who sang as I mentioned, the national anthem at the Republican National Convention in 1984, directly connected into George Bush Sr. and these Skull of Bones men that obviously more than just that. I think when you understand, like,
goes back to Hellfire,
exactly.
Benjamin Franklin, they found in that basement of that home that he lived in, I think it was in London, just hundreds of
bones,
human remains down in his basement.
Crazy. It's so crazy. And a lot of them looked like children. That's what they claimed, which is just,
But though that was for research, he had a roommate at one time that was a physician, and maybe he was, doing some autopsies and
they were
for
grave
science.
robbers, right? That's what they say. They were grave robbers for scientific experimentation purposes only. What a very convenient narrative.
Yeah, some of the bones were burned too. I'm sure. Yeah, that was part of the experiments too.
Oh, right. And by the way, that there's an occult facet to burning of a corpse that apparently comes in the form of some of the satanic occult rituals that they apparently they practice. And this came in the form of the Kinkora boys' home scandal, which blew me away. It all happened in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and it was a failed state as well. And there was a civil war that had taken place, and it was all pushed and provoked and by British intelligence, Western, U.S. intelligence were involved directly as well. You had MI5 that were they called it Operation Clockwork Orange, and it was I believe it was named after the film. I can't recall now if it was before the film or after, but either way, it was all about this sort of strategy of tension and destabilizing Ireland, and then sort of just ruling over the ashes, and as they do, typically, but again, it seemed like the Alpha Freemasonic lodges were directly connected into the effort in the covert operations that were being conducted in Northern Ireland, and how they were funding these paramilitary organizations to sort of create this strategy of tension and destabilize through, these various destabilization tactics. They would have domestic bombings, mass shootings, right? It's everything that you could witness in what Jose and I refer to, Jose from No Way Jose, and we do a show called Already Dead every Tuesday night at 9:30 Eastern time. It's pretty fun. But we are kind of like, we've been kind of like working on this theory that essentially, Operation Gladio and the stay behind networks that were laid after World War II essentially laid the international intelligence organization at large, that, essentially it provides them with zero accountability, and also it circumvents world leaders and world governments to a certain extent. And that's exactly what
compromises them. That gives them the power. And
exactly.
Folks, for those that's maybe not with us and thinking we're just crazy, this is the same company, if you want to call it a company, organization, whatever, that was caught red-handed back in the 60s and 70s, that was smuggling cocaine and heroin over the border and selling it and making money
Absolutely.
off that, and then compromising these mafia bosses because they were the ones supplying them with all the drugs. And then when they didn't get in line, boom, there's you a drug bust. And at the same time, breaking up homes, making this whole fatherless nation going on. And just, it's a manufactured downward spiral for not only greed and money, but for control of the populace and the people in the power seats.
Yep. Yeah, I 100% agree. I think it's truly with it seems as if not only the Gladio network was laid in you have the rat lines that were clearly, the sort of, it was staged by the original OSS, right? I forget what they were called before they even had the OSS, as far as the terminology they were utilizing at the time, but they were working in hand in hand with the Vatican at the time, and were essentially, it was organized crime, right? So it was where the mafia met with the Vatican and the intelligence footprint, and they were all essentially coexisting. And there's a book by Paul Williams called Operation Gladio, The Unholy Alliance, and he sort of stages how this alliance took place post World War II, and truly, at the very least, that's where it was, implemented in its sort of systematic structural integrity, was implemented in that moment. And ever since, you got the 63 sort of killing of the king ritual in Dallas because someone got a little bit too, I think, just confident in being able to expose the fraternal organizations of powerful influence in certain ways, and because due to being initiated and understanding how the power paradigm existed. That's the only reason that JFK was willing to say some of the things that he did, was because he was so well aware of the structured system, and wasn't, maybe he was having a moral crisis. I don't know. It's hard to decide why he would have made some of the statements that he did. I'm not trying to judge the ethical values of an individual that's a stranger to me, but I can only gauge on what we kind of know and what's publicly available. Just before his
he
death,
starts speaking out against these hidden hands,
exactly,
and it's like within a couple months or something like that. It was a short time frame. Yeah,
exactly.
he's unalived.
100%. And meanwhile, he's not only going against the fraternal organizations, which P2, Le Circle, these secret societies, they legitimately were members of the, Alan Dulles, Henry Kissinger. These individuals were legitimate members of these secret societies, and were, meeting to essentially lay out the path for the ultimate agenda playing out despite the president in power. It didn't matter. And so this was the permanent establishment playing out in real time. The reason why RFK and JFK, when they assumed office, when JFK got elected, they didn't know for months that there were domestic black sites set up all throughout the U.S. that were essentially training the Cuban exiles in these domestic destabilization gladio techniques. Right. And then utilizing them in domestic situations. Right. Not only so you had what they claimed, and that comes up in The Hand of Death and Henry Lee Lucas in that context as well, because you're witnessing again, apparently during when Nixon was vice president, he apparently gave a call to Howard Hughes, and he says, for plausible deniability purposes, we need you to set up these various domestic black sites, right, utilizing these shell corporations and companies and these various paramilitary organizations, and therefore we can, sort of in this covert way, we can train up these operatives to then green light go at any moment in time to sort of pave the way for various, precedent setting operations. Whether it's they want to pass certain legislation, so they want to manufacture consent.
They do it today. I mean, Black Lives Matter, the Pride stuff. I mean, where's all this money coming from to fund this agenda and cause this chaos? And you make a problem because you already have a solution and an end goal that you want. So you make this, chaos, and hey, we got the order right here. 9/11, got us so spooked that we would do anything, give away any freedoms and privacy we got if you can guarantee us that the 9/11, something like that won't happen again. CV-19. We'll sign anything. Yeah, just keep us safe. Well, I'll take this manufactured cure you got if we can all keep our jobs and get back to normal. And then at the same time, you got the leader of the world. Things are not going to get back to normal until 90% of the populace is taking our meds.
Right. That's seriously what I mean. And it is into modern day. They're utilizing these very same techniques. And we just refer to it as modern gladio. That's what I've been referring to it as recently, just because it kind of, to me, gladio just refers to this sort of umbrella reference to these very, well-established, sophisticated methods that they utilize to urge, not only manufacture consent, but legitimately condition the public and put them in a state of fear to where they're far more willing to embrace the dystopian outcome. And that in itself is like psychological warfare at its best. Right. And I think one of the greatest examples of who helped seed this sort of psychological warfare conditioning system and put it in a perfect place is Michael Aquino, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, who he comes up so often. He's a satanic pedophile who was not only a member and very close friends with Anton LaVey and a member of the Church of Satan. He then allegedly has a dispute and a falling out with Anton LaVey. I don't believe this. I think he legitimately took a fraction of the members of the Church of Satan and then founded what became an occult organization and occult ideological system itself, which was the Temple of Set. And so he created the Temple of Set, which was, this sort of offshoot of the Church of Satan. And they practiced this different, allegedly this different ideology they would practice, which, gave them what they called the eternal black flame, and that they themselves could become their own gods. And oh my God, it's so crazy, man, because this comes into play with like a Peter Nygard type, right? Who they call Canada's Epstein, who the quote he had said, that he was the god of this eternal realm. Essentially, it was so crazy actually reading what this guy said. Let me pull it up actually, because it's nuts. There was this case that I saw Peter Nygard talk about. Essentially, he's standing there, or he's sitting there with one of his friends who he jointly funds all of these insane, sort of transhumanist, modern eugenics, effort, scientific
theosophy. That's so amazing. I was about to bring that up, and you beat me to it. But they do. I think they manufacture these branch offs, and they do that because it's a wing of it's two wings of the same bird. I think they do that to widen their reach. 100%. Because the core values are the same. It's just they might differ a little bit here, a little bit there, but they're really in cahoots with one another. Because you had that with Madame Blavatsky and Alice Bailey. A lot of people don't 100%. Really dig too deep into her, but I mean, she followed this occult of Blavatsky in California. And what happened? The same thing that you just described with that other guy. They had a difference of opinion on some things. And they split. And a fraction of them went off, and they moved to New York, and they started this new branch of theosophy, all based on Madame Blavatsky, but just some different caveats. And they started the whole Lucifer Trust Company. And all of your world leaders, without fail, are into this theosophy and transhumanism, one world consciousness, and all that kind of stuff.
100%. Not only was Peter Nygard harvesting eggs and legit from women, allegedly Epstein was as well at his Zorro Ranch property. You had Juliette Bryant was one of the victims of Epstein. She's made a lot of very interesting claims, some of them they're extraordinary claims, but still, much of what she says, I take very seriously, right? And she claims that she was one of Epstein's victims, trafficked and spent time at the Zorro Ranch property. She wakes up paralyzed and naked on an operating table while at Zorro Ranch in the middle of the night one night. And all of the victims that go through this same process as Juliette, she claims, have the same symbolic branding, where they were branded with a blue butterfly on them, which she says represents Lilith, the first wife of Adam, who she says harvesting eggs was allegedly a priority within Epstein's theory of eugenics. And they weren't far at all at the Zorro property from this military base, the Dulce base, allegedly. And so that was, I think, a priority. And then you consider the fact that Peter Nygard, as I just mentioned, Canada's Epstein, who was involved in many of this transhumanist sort of scientific funding enterprises with Epstein himself. They overlap, being represented on this foundation called the Lifeboat Foundation, which is really crazy when you look into what the hell was going on there. Because, and by the way, Nygard, he allegedly said this because he had this obsession with immortality, right? And he has a God complex, and he's quoted saying in some sort of like spontaneous shouting, rage that he was in, he says, "I am God. Do you not understand? This is my plane. I can do whatever the hell I want." Right? Like that's the mentality of some of these individuals. And to understand that Epstein had a stable of women he was attempting to impregnate at all times in this effort to seed the human race with more Epsteins, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, one thing that brought up in my mind when you mentioned the butterfly branding, is it the monarch butterfly?
Right.
And you have all this stuff doing with Monarch, and it's an evolutionary thing. Because what do they say? They goes back to Hitler producing the perfect man, the Uber man.
The Uber man.
And that's what the whole, transhumanism thing goal is. It's to make humanity better, to make them the supreme, and to evolve them. Well, you look at the symbology of a butterfly. It's a little worm. And what happens? It goes into a cocoon, bursts out, and it's evolved into this beautiful thing to the next stage of life.
You're totally right. Yeah. That in itself is the reason why it's very symbolic. It's the name Monarch. I believe it was, I just read this amazing piece by Ron Patton called Project Monarch. And he really does go all the way back to the Anglo Alliance in the 19th century. He talks about the Bavarian Jesuits in the 1770s. And he talks about the ancient, just the ancient, what were the schools called in ancient Egypt, and then prior to that as well, that I forget what they're called, but there's essentially
heard of the mystery schools or
the mystery schools. Yeah, thank you. That is what they're typically referred to as. And he explains a lot of how the casting of spells was truly just hypnotism, and that people were unaware of. It was just different language. It was couched in different language, and since obviously ancient times, it's been very much modernized in the terms that they're utilizing, but modern mind control is legitimately magic, right? It's occult magic in many ways, and utilizing even electromagnetic frequencies and EMF, ELF. They can allegedly, according to Dr. Robert Duncan, this Harvard scientist who claims that he interrogated, or not interrogated, but just interviewed like thousands, or no, hold on. Let me get the note, because I don't want to mess that up, because it's fascinating when you actually find out what he alleges, especially in context.
Yeah,
here it is.
I can't speak off the top of my head, but I just recently read a book. It was by something Farrell is his last name, but Mark from My Family Thinks I'm Crazy recommended it to me. And like, I don't agree with 90% of the stuff he's saying, but he's talking about some stuff and pointing, to what I think's a common truth. He's just calling it something else. I call it God. I call it, fallen angels. He calls them Anunnaki. I call them, Genesis 6 fallen angels. But he was talking really heavily in one of the chapters about MK Ultra and all the stuff that they were doing. And he mentioned some professor from Harvard that invented some kind of electromagnetic wave machine that influences people and changes their minds, and you can program influences into them and thoughts. And they were actually planning, they called him, and this was supposedly in unclassified documents. They called that guy during the Waco thing. What's that guy's name?
God. David Koresh.
Yes, they called him, because remember how they surrounded that place and they were shooting all these loud sirens and trying to do this psychological warfare. So, but they called that doctor and asked him to use his machine on that camp. And they asked him if they think it would work. And he was like, yeah, I know it'll work. And he was like, well, come down here. We want you to subconsciously send out waves to make them kill themselves, just like the drinking of the Kool-Aid, do a mass suicide.
Dude.
Could you do that? And he said, yes, I could do that. He said, but I'm not doing that. And they never involved him, but there's supposedly unclassified documents in his testimony that, yeah, he created this thing. There's a patent for it. And the U.S. government even tried to get him to use it against the Koreshians in Waco.
Absolutely. No, that exists 100%. And there's even, there's much more than that. There's essentially a report called the Wiltshire Report as well. And this blew my mind, brother. Like, hold on, let me pull this as well, because I just pulled the Dr. Robert Duncan note. We'll have to talk about that.
With the price of eggs and bread slowly approaching a day's wages, it's more important than ever than to secure the value of your dollar. One thing that has remained steady is gold and silver throughout the ages. Back in Roman times, a piece of gold would get you a toga. That's the equivalent of $3,000 today. that still remains true to this day. For a full suit, shoes, tie, you're looking at about $3,000. Because gold and silver holds its value. So if you're tired of watching the value of your dollar go down every single day, it's time to get off your hands and make a move. I've recently teamed with Cornerstone Asset Metals. Reach out to those guys for all of your financial needs. It's time to trade in that forever devaluing dollar into hard assets that you can hold, like gold and silver. Be sure and check the link down in the description or the number on the screen. And hey, tell them Doc Brown sent you.
The Waco aspect of mind control being involved. Like I was very much unaware of it, and I had done an episode early on about Waco, and but I had never stumbled across. I had known they used this sort of psychological warfare on the Branch Davidians during the siege, obviously, where they're playing like ridiculous. They're playing like rabbits being slaughtered, Buddhist chanting that's all layered over each other. It's legitimately like this, what did they call them? Psychological warriors or something. I can't remember when they were doing the sort of, experiments in the military
Sleep
where they
deprivation, keep them up. They wouldn't let them sleep and driving them crazy.
Exactly. The Clockwork Orange style, sort of like forcing their eyelids open while they force them to watch, over and over these various kind of like, it was usually very violent imagery that would be just patterned into each other and like forcefully shown over and over in this recycled way. And it was supposed to be obviously programming them, but it was strange because there's far more to it. I think that especially when you see how individuals are potentially programmed with subliminals while they're asleep, that kind of blows me away, right? But it goes as far as like Dr. Robert Duncan, I had brought up his name earlier, right? And this kind of like, it's something that, to me, it offered a window into how modern mind control can potentially, be utilized in this newfound application, where potentially this Dr. Robert Duncan he was a Harvard graduate who had written this book. He's an investigator, and the book was called Project Soul Catcher: Secrets of Cyber and Cybernetic Warfare Revealed. And he explains in 2012 that for the past 10 years, he had personally interviewed more than 650 people who claimed to have been under government mind control. And many of them said they were in the Manchurian Candidate ID program free. He went to the Senate Intelligence Committee and met with 26 senators as well as the head of the LA FBI. After he works with the consortium of scientists on a research project for over 8 years, he provides the closest estimate he could reach. And he says that there are about 10,000 Manchurian candidates in the works being programmed by the CIA right now that can be used at any time around the world. And that he also claims and concludes that only a small percentage of these 10,000 are actually successful Manchurians, and that apparently this provides the CIA and allows them to subvert certain international laws forbidding the agency to engage in the assassination of foreign leaders through the strategy of indirection, or utilizing agency handlers to indoctrinate individuals into these Manchurian candidate programs self-righteously. Apparently it's you're seeing just like there many different examples of how they'll self-righteously assert plausible deniability after the fact. But Dr. Robert Duncan claims that a lot of these alleged mass shooters, he says, such as James Holmes, falls into this Manchurian candidate category as well. And he suggests one of the ultimate priorities is to predominantly manufacture consent for landmark gun legislation, largely encouraging Americans to disarm themselves. Through a combination of drugs, manipulative psychological techniques, and advanced cybernetics, they have achieved many of the goals of Project MKUltra. He explains that modern-day technology does not require brain implants, although they do work very well. But they seem to rely much more on post-hypnotic suggestion. Now, I thought that was interesting, especially considering the Doge employee, Big Balls. I forget what his actual name is now. Corstein. And he was the one who was allegedly just beaten in D.C. and provided it was the week prior to provide this sort of a foundation and precedent-setting notion that would potentially manufacture consent for the federal takeover that was called Liberation Day of D.C. and the basically not only was the National Guard brought in, but the just the Metropolitan DC Metropolitan Police Department was essentially overruled by the federal agents who took control and superseded the mayor and anyone else who was involved at the local level. So it's just another way to centralize power to the federal government, obviously, right? But there are these precedent-setting operations on each side of the political spectrum that will manufacture consent for these very same, dystopian measures and policies that are then, entirely, abused, right? It's just a complete abuse of power, right? And once more, you never witness the state acknowledging the fact that, oh, whoops, we took a little bit too much control here. We should ease back, our overall, right? Dystopian, totalitarian nature of how the state kind of functions. It's really
telling your boss, hey, you overpaid me, $1,000 on this check. I rightfully couldn't take this here. Take it back. No, that never happened.
Exactly. But yeah, that just to me, it's interesting because I found out that individual Doge employee who was allegedly kind of beat and provided this sort of, at least if you look at the crime statistics, allegedly, it's not like it's even crime's a little bit down in DC compared to, the past. I'm not saying crime is great or anything. I'm just saying that it doesn't seem, it seems as if there is an agenda at play here, and we're potentially being led by the nose into embracing it based on these kind of recent publicated, just these articles that have been published that kind of provide this precedent-setting notion, and I think provide the general public with an incentive to call for, we need a crackdown, on crime in DC or wherever. And I'm not saying that that's outside the realm of possibility as far as crime is concerned in these areas, but I am saying that the federal government abuse of power is never the solution, at least in my mind. Right. I just think that that's a slippery slope. And inevitably, when the power or when the pendulum of in DC, as far as the power cabal and the presidential administration in office swings to the other side, each individual will obviously, it never ends well. Right. For kind of like creating these it's really just another power grab. Right. In my mind. And so I'm looking at all of that and how it factors into potentially this Big Balls, right, who has been the Doge employee, who also first became like very much in the public spotlight a few months back for another sort of political agenda that was attached to him, which was just the defunding of certain federal organizations, or like USAID and things of that nature. And so he's already provided a sort of precedent-setting notion in the framework of the mainstream media. And so now it turns out that this individual gets assaulted in DC and provides Trump with this sort of, at least he even referenced this specific case for an example as to how crime is out of control in DC, right? And how this what's it called? The Home Rule Act would be the next step of liberating DC. And that was a week prior to him actually doing that this week. And so, and then of course he threatens to do this in New York, Chicago, and and Los Angeles as well. So it's, again,
that's what I was going to say. California, number one thing popped in my head. And it's like, these people don't realize, they're against the administration right now, with their ideology and things. So it's like, yeah, if you're going in the street and you're rioting and you're burning cities down and businesses and stuff like that, you're not doing yourselves any favor, folks.
Hell
because the state is supposed to take care of itself. So if you are causing this huge disruption and the state can't handle it, well, what do you think's going to happen next? Martial law, the federal government, the feds are going to come in and lock you down, and then they're going to get control over your state.
Exactly.
But I think it's a mixture. I mean, I think it is just ignorant people, that's from this generation of safe spaces and crying and pitching a fit in the dollar store or Walmart to get that toy they wanted, and they didn't get their ass busted. So they think it's okay to do that now. And if they do that, they'll get their way. But at the same time, I think there's, like you talked about, there's implants, there's feds and people there that entice the crowd, that throw the first brick, push them to get to that point, because we even seen that with the January 6th stuff.
Absolutely.
Now it's come out. There were so many feds in that crowd that was leading the charge, and trying to encourage the herd mentality, so to speak.
Yeah. And the disappearing pipe bomber too, right? That guy was a Fed, straight up. Like there's a legitimate footprint you can tie back. It's very strange how many different examples you can point to that show that you had spooks infiltrating and escalating. And that's what they do at every level to attempt to obviously undermine the credibility of a protest in general, which, say whatever you want. I personally, I don't think much is accomplished by protesting. I think it's more like if you show up at a protest, you're kind of setting yourself up, and you're running a very high risk of becoming vulnerable in that moment, and clearly being implicated in some sort of criminal, escalation that would occur. And
information gathering, all the drones and cameras at these things, they're getting profiles on you, all your facial features, all this stuff is getting put into a program, and you're being profiled, man.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's there's no doubt in my mind. But the only reason I brought all that up was because I felt like I found out that kid, that Doge employee, he was, prior to being employed at Doge, he worked for Neuralink. And so I was just like, oh no, imagining microchips, right? Modern versions of the Manchurian Candidate programs, and how, yes, they utilize microchips, but post-hypnotic suggestion actually works far more superior as far as the effective nature of it. But still, it's imagining, I'm not saying there's any real evidence of this, but imagine if you wanted to put, let's say, position a strategic asset in place, and he were a part of some sort of precedent-setting operation that included a Manchurian Candidate to just, obviously provide an avenue to manufacturing consent for some sort of dystopian policy. That is par for the course in my mind, and so it's on the table as a legitimate option, as far as you never know what they're attempting to achieve. And I think the strategic nature of the clandestine operations they run domestically, it fits perfectly, and in no way, especially understanding Elon's history and his family alone, like his grandfather Haldeman, he ran Technocracy Incorporated was the organization that he ran, and he was a part of the social credit party in Canada. So you want to know what actually every single principle that Elon Musk is attempting to pursue, it comes exactly from that playbook that his own, totalitarian grandfather was pursuing as well, or I think it was his grandfather. Yeah. And it just, to me, it proves out that so many of these prominent individuals are manufactured personalities, to sort of be larger than life. This sort of fairy tale notion that the general public will eat up at face value, and they will, again, create those platforms for the false idols to be worshipped, to where then they will just fall perfectly into place, be corralled back into this establishment line. And to me, it's always they're attempting to offer these plausible alternative solutions that truly are just another trap that will help facilitate the very same dystopian agenda. And that's where you have to remain skeptical at all times. You can't I don't play partisan politics. I don't have like any sort of, I don't believe anyone's coming to save us in terms of a human being who has our best interest at heart and rises to the center of power in DC. I don't believe that is possible. I think essentially you have to be corrupt and compromised at a certain level, or you'll never reach these prominent positions of power, and I think that's been very much exposed over time, and there's a reason why. It's like, what is a president? It's essentially the individual in charge of public relations for the general public. It's like he's out there trying to manage public perception for the overall elitist agenda playing out, and whatever version of it you want to call it. I mean, the Great Reset, Operation Lockstep. I mean, in every way, they're pursuing an identical agenda, right? It doesn't matter which political party is in charge.
One world government utopia. They've been slowly turning up that boiling water. It's like the frog in water. If you turn it straight up to 100, that thing's going to feel the heat and jump out. But if you just slowly notch it up, over 50 years, 60 years, just little by little, you're not going to notice it till it's too late. And that's the plan.
Yep. Yeah. And I think it's in every way we're witnessing the pivot to technocracy and the digital enslavement that they're attempting to achieve, obviously. And
digital currency.
Yep. Which hand in hand with what the social credit model of sort of the social credit score model of the everything app, that maybe what was Klaus Schwab saying? He was warning, he was threatening the general public, claiming the next
crisis is EMPs and the down of the electrical grid.
Exactly. He said it will make COVID pale in comparison. And essentially
he predicted COVID. They were talking about a worldwide pandemic before it happened.
Exactly. I mean, Event 201 is such a great example of the tabletop simulation exercise, but it goes far beyond that. I mean, they've been manufacturing that crisis for quite some time. And it just, honestly, I think they're even potentially ahead of schedule as much as it achieved, really, in terms of a precedent-setting operation. I mean, my God, the dystopian nature of the COVID policies and how they were embraced so willingly due to a perceived threat, which was just entirely, again, manufactured in more ways than one. And it's just, to me, it was very frustrating to witness and live through, right? Because it revealed how much we've all been conditioned, but at the same time, it just goes to show how critical thinking skills just go out the window whenever someone feels there's a potential threat, and that's what you have to defend yourself against, is that sort of weakness. Right.
And there's nothing new, right? No. Solomon said it best, nothing new is under the sun. You got Benjamin Franklin talking about, hundreds of years ago. What did he say? He said, those that will trade their freedom for the illusion of security deserve neither. So they were doing this crap back then. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that is 100% true. And they've been problem, reaction, solution for how long, and it's legitimately, I think, proven to be a very efficient and effective model, and that is the reason why they continue to utilize the very same playbook. But it's also allowed for individuals who, like ourselves, who at least kind of possess this pattern recognition ability. You know what I mean? It's just at the very least, due to overexposure, it's kind of become a skill set, right, in a way. And I'm very much proud of that fact, that I kind of feel like I have the tools necessary to not fall for the deception, right, which is always deliberately being placed and presented to us. But again, it's like, we're all, I think, vulnerable to much of the deception. So it's just, again, we have to be aware of that, and again, be cautious in sort of engaging in a lot of this just manipulation, but I will say that the craziest part of what Dr. Robert Duncan said blew me away. It was just kind of on, and also, I think the Project Monarch we should discuss a little bit deeper as well, because of how much I think there's a spiritual connection to the alters and implementing the dissociative identity disorder and the multiple personality disorder, which allegedly through Monarch and the sort of trauma, sexual, abuse that they would utilize as a tool. Essentially, they claim that it's far more efficient in the prepubescent context, which is terrible and disgusting. But legitimately, they claim that the traumatic abuse, allegedly, it is far more efficient and effective in the younger the victim. And
it makes an alternate personality, where the alternate personality takes the trauma and puts it in a little box in their brain. You know what I mean? It kind of they branch off.
Compartmentalize it. Yeah. It's the fight or flight response that essentially it's a way to endure the abuse in this sort of distant way. You can attempt to protect yourself within the context of your own mind from the abuse that's playing out. And, it's disturbing as hell to even contemplate or conceive, just as far as the conception alone. But yeah, basically in this insane context of the combination of different methods they would utilize for human behavioral modification research, Dr. Robert Duncan claims that the modern day technology, as I mentioned, they rely much more on post-hypnotic suggestion, although the brain implants do work well. But then he says one of the goals is to, of course, confirm what we're saying, to create split personality, but split personality spies, so they could pass information without even knowing it, and even commit murder with no memory of the crime, so they could still pass a polygraph test, which is exactly what happened to Sirhan Sirhan. Like, he had no idea what had happened. And when he's tackled to the ground after shooting the blanks in the pantry at the Ambassador Hotel, right when RFK was assassinated, he's in a trance 100%. He's tackled to the ground and he's still excessively, he can't stop pulling an imaginary, he's still pulling the trigger on a weapon that isn't even in his hand anymore. And that goes to show when he's put into a trance on the record and during the trial, where he does the exact same thing, where they walk him through the scene in the pantry and he just starts convulsing and he starts pulling an imaginary trigger. And it was just obviously a part of his programming. And so it wasn't as if he was pulling a trigger knowingly. Basically, how it was presented was essentially that he was shooting blanks as a distractionary tactic from the actual assassin, who was point blank range behind RFK's head, and his name was Thane Eugene Cesar. He's actually I think he got away with he got away with getting rid of the weapon in a very sloppy way, but it was due to his connections to Howard Hughes and the intelligence apparatus at the time. And again, he's connected as a mafia hitman. So he was a hitman hired by the intelligence apparatus through Howard Hughes Shell Corporation to show up as a security guard moonlighting at the Ambassador Hotel just before RFK is about to have his major, address to the public right after he gets elected, essentially as the primary Democratic representative going forward because it was the primary process at the time. So he was basically being awarded, his political victory for winning the primaries and becoming the main Democratic representative going forward for the presidential campaign. And again, he was in no way going to lose, I don't think, that presidential election cycle, and mainly just due to his relationship as JFK's brother, honestly, at that time, let alone some of his civil rights and stuff like that was being very much at least
his brother was hell on their system, so they just I'm sure they safely assumed the brother would be too.
Exactly. And what is it, 68 whenever he gets assassinated, and JFK was in 63. And what's more fascinating about all of that is that in the RFK assassination, I couldn't believe it, but it turns out that apparently just before he would go to the Ambassador Hotel, It's fascinating because it turns out that Richard Condon, the individual, the Manchurian Candidate, right? The original book was written, and it turns out that John Frankenheimer, right, who adapted the original film, he adapted it in 1962. It was October of 1962, and the story, obviously, the plot of the Manchurian Candidate is a covert communist plot to kill the president, and right, and Frankenheimer had originally sought out JFK's approval of the film, allegedly, due to the heightened state of the political climate in America at the time. JFK allegedly urges him to follow through with the project anyway, and then by November of 1963, so in less than a year's time, or no, in a year and a month, essentially, a little bit less, he would be assassinated in Dallas. But what's more interesting to me is that you had a dinner party take place 5 years after the assassination of JFK. And by the way, after he's assassinated, the film was pulled out of circulation until 1987.
Are you a hunter, a hiker, or just an outdoor enthusiast? Well, if you are, you know that good quality gear is hard to come by. And finding all-American made is like finding Bigfoot in the woods. Hence the name of Squatch Survival Gear. Head on over to squatchsurvivalgear.com. Use the code PLP10 for 10% off store-wide.
And I didn't realize the original film was actually pulled from circulation because, I mean, if you watch The Manchurian Candidate, it's crazy. I mean, it's Frank Sinatra and what's her name? Either way, this individual is programmed to legitimately walk up and kill his own a soldier that he had known personally, and then he served in the military with, and he was friends with this individual, and he was just put into a hypnotic trance, provided with the trigger words necessary for him to be triggered into that, obvious programming that he had been practicing while in a hypnotic trance prior. And then he would act out his programming entirely, sociopathic, unemotionally, walk up as if nothing else was different. And the individual who he's ordered to shoot in this sort of environment where they're presenting this to like a panel of scientists essentially who are sitting in like theater seats, watching this take place with a military official leading the process all the way, and a scientist as well, I think, but either way. And you witness him being given his a trigger as far as the words that are necessary to trigger the trance, and then he proceeds to walk forward and shoot his what would basically be one of his closest friends in the head, who is also sort of in a trance and just smiling, right? And it just goes to show that there's no emotional impact when you're carrying out your programming. But the fact of the matter is that this individual, Frankenheimer, who had sought out JFK's approval for the film just before he would die, and then the film itself would go out of circulation until 25 years later. Well, Frankenheimer gave
like JFK knew, you know what I mean? That's what I think. I think it's like he knew they were after him, they were going to kill him, and this guy come up with this movie. Yes, push that out that way. When something happens to me, people will have a clue and know what's going on.
It sounds like it.
After the fact, they yanked it. It's like, no, we'll let this come out once everybody's forgot about it.
Exactly, especially since it's, the mind control nature of that plot is what is most fascinating to me. Not just the Manchurian aspect of what they were able to accomplish, but the fact that in 1968, there's a dinner party 5 years after the death of JFK, and it's hosted by Frankenheimer himself. And Robert Kennedy happens to be at this party, right? Then apparently the party is being hosted by Frankenheimer on behalf of Robert Kennedy. And so who's at this dinner party? And by the way, apparently it gets far more interesting than this, because it turns out that there were Sirhan was allegedly at a party hosted at Sharon Tate's house as well. So that's very interesting, especially concerning the Manson murders and Sharon Tate, the fertility death ritual that she was sort of, forced to endure. But they were all practicing witchcraft. They were members of the Process Church of the Final Judgment as well, and allegedly were visiting the Rome chapter for a short time before they came back, and Sharon Tate was murdered, which is very interesting. And then that Rome chapter of the Process shut down right after the Manson murders took place. In the local chapter that was associated with Pasadena and the law, the Freemasonic Lodge in that area, and what did they call it? The Devil's Staircase, and these various locations where they were all meeting. Manson was showing up there. They were all practicing blood rituals and sex magic. And it's very interesting because it goes to show why there was allegedly footage that the LAPD discovered at the Roman Polanski house when Sharon Tate was killed, that showed like footage of her being sadistically abused and tortured in a sort of like orgy rape, right? And Roman Polanski was allegedly filming it, which is just, it's very interesting, especially considering their backgrounds in the occult, and practicing some of these rituals. So, Rosemary's Baby, right? And all these various, connections to Polanski himself. I mean, I think it's very obvious that I think even Sharon Tate was potentially believed to have been a witch, who was practicing this black magic in certain ways. So it's not as if she were entirely innocent in this situation, but, how are we to know at a certain point? It's just like there's a lot that is still out there for us to find that kind of proves out and reinforces so much of these connections. And I just think that whenever you discover that RFK is actually at this dinner party, and he's attending the dinner party with his 4 children and his wife, as well as Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski, who are at this dinner party with RFK. And in 24 hours, within 24 hours later, Bobby Kennedy's assassinated at the Ambassador Hotel. And so that, to me, especially considering that this was the evening of the election where he won the California state primary, he's supposed to go back to the hotel where he gives this famous speech, right? On to Chicago is what it was called. And then just moments later, he's like ushered through in a rush in this very sort of misdirected way on purpose, because this is what you do in an op. And he's driven off course by his handler, who has him, basically the security has him by the arm. They take him in a different direction than what was necessarily planned, and essentially take him through this small area into the pantry of the Ambassador. And that was where all of these people, it was very, crowded and cluttered. And so there was it gave an advantage for the, just the sort of tactics being utilized on the ground in the operation, because it's sort of like tactic of misdirection. Right. And so I just thought it was interesting. They quickly bring him into the pantry, and then essentially Sirhan had already been placed into the trance because he has a terrible, essentially induced amnesia that he experiences prior to the incident in the pantry. And all of it was centered around, he kept saying coffee, right? He basically went into the Ambassador, sort of where the pantry was located. There were a couple of spots you could sit down, have a coffee or something. And he allegedly followed a girl in a polka dot dress into the pantry where he had coffee. And all he could say when he was in a trance is coffee, coffee, coffee. It's like the last thing he could remember. And then essentially they walk him through it as well, though. And it's very insane because he starts talking about when he's under hypnosis, the first things he starts to write on the paper. And I told this, it's insane because there's Dr. Bernard Diamond is an expert in psychology. And he essentially, he's the one who put Sirhan into a hypnotic trance in order to have him relive the events under hypnosis. And they say, who was with you when you shot him? Right. And he says, the girl. And then they essentially start asking him about his recollection of being choked by someone on a table in the pantry is the only thing he can remember at all. So that's essentially him coming out of his programming. And so this apparently, after he's grabbed and put into a headlock and he's still trying to pump out imaginary bullets in the blank. It's just crazy to me. But he couldn't recall shooting him. He couldn't even remember writing anything about wanting to kill him. And there's a book that was discovered, allegedly his personal journal. And he was just writing over and over, RFK must die, RFK must die. And it was just like very strange, but it seemed like while he was in his hypnotic trance, he was just further reinforcing the programming to a certain extent to where that's effectively what it seemed as if what, had been happening, because he was described as going into a hypnotic trance and seeing targets in front of his eyes, right? So he thought he was at the shooting range, which, if you've been hypnotized and then you've been forced to just continually shoot at a shooting range based on certain, physical triggers, psychological triggers that have been set up through the hypnotization process, it makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, you go into autopilot. I mean, I'm sure all of us can, sympathize with some of us sleepwalk, like we, have a dream that we're going to the bathroom and then we're going to go take a pee, and we wake up and we're standing in the bathroom and we're peeing all over ourselves,
100%.
Or, I mean, if you're not a sleepwalker, I mean, I'm sure many men can vouch if we're being honest. We've had a dream that we're going to the bathroom and we go to pee, and all of a sudden we just feel warmness all over our lap and we wake up in bed. Oh shit.
Right.
You know what I mean? So if you're put in a hypnotic state and you're shown that, your body kind of goes into autopilot. So you have a dream that you're in the bathroom, you're going to pee. If you got a dream that you're at the shooting range with a gun in your hand, you're going to pull the trigger.
100%. And it is crazy too, because there was basically Sirhan's lawyers. They still argue as recently as like 2012. I think it was even later than that, though they made statements since. But yeah, they were talking about how Sirhan was definitely, they believe, and legal papers exist as well, that he was essentially manipulated by a seductive girl in a mind control plot to shoot RFK, and his bullets did not kill the presidential candidate. And further, there were documents provided by the attorneys that apparently there were, extensive coverage on this, but it didn't really make the public spotlight in any real way. But still, you have these interviews with Sirhan during the past, as far as throughout like the entire process of his just as far as being apprehended in custody and serving out his conviction. He has definitely had multiple scientists and individual hypnotists and various psychological experts who have tried to come and conduct like interviews with him and try and see where he truly is psychologically, and if he were as suggestible as it was allegedly claimed during the original trial. For the expert hypnotists who were involved in that original trial. And so, but what is very strange is that, of course, he's placed again under hypnosis during these interviews years later. And this is, within the past 10 years, this has happened with Sirhan. And there's still, even RFK Jr. came forward and claimed that he went and met with Sirhan, and he claims he's innocent and didn't kill his father. And, as much as I think RFK Jr. is definitely compromised at some level by the Epstein network, just because of like, you look at the connection to, first of all, he's very much pictured with Epstein, and beyond that, he's his wife, right? She basically discovers his perverted sex diary and then commits suicide. She hangs herself, which that was one of his ex-wives, right? And it's very strange, the circumstances involved with that, because it seems as if, I'm not sure if there was foul play or what, but it does seem as if there's some sort of human compromise involved with RFK Jr. But I will say that some of his work I very much appreciated, and I even bought his book on Fauci, right? And I really, honestly, there's major portions of that book that are extremely valuable in terms of just like these disturbing scientific experiments that Fauci was conducting, utilizing orphans and children as just experimental test subjects, and then mass graves of these children discovered, through these various state subsidized it's very disturbing. And the Catholic clergy, I believe, is also implicated in being involved in some of this as well, which makes sense because Kathy O'Brien, the alleged MKUltra Project Monarch victim that came forward many years ago, she said that she basically married her therapist, who she said helped like bring her back and recover her memories of her abuse. And if you know about like the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, they have a scientific advisory board that's filled, it's oversaturated with mind control operatives. Like Dr. Louis Jolyon West is one of the key operatives, Dr. Martin T. Orne, another one. And the FMSF, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, was created by a pedophile who was accused of raping his daughter, and the mom being involved as well, and in the abuse, and at least, somewhat in support of it. And so then they create a foundation. Imagine that, right? Like even if you were falsely accused by imagine if you were falsely accused by your child who just has psychological issues and is manufacturing these false abuse allegations. I'm just trying to play like devil's advocate to imagine, would you then go on and found an organization that attempts to go around the world infiltrating criminal cases and undermining the victim witness accounts by children who are overwhelmingly sadistically abused by? Yeah, it seems like it was far more of a sinister organization created under the guise of doing exactly that, right? Attempting to go around the country, insert themselves at a level where they claim they're experts. Elizabeth Loftus is one of the great examples of that. She goes around to McMartin Preschool, various different, criminal cases, and she's not acting in good faith, right? She's just attempting to muddy the waters and undermine the credibility of the victim witnesses.
So doubt.
Yep, exactly. And so that in itself, I think, proves out over time that organization was directly, created to sow clouds of doubt, at least cast clouds of doubt surrounding many of these mind control operations, I believe, that have been conducted as well under the guise of, various just religious cult organizations. I mean, I always use the example of Congressman Leo Ryan's aide, William Holsinger, who claims that Jonestown was one of those religious cults that sprouted up directly after the church committee hearings, when they allegedly were providing public transparency in regard to the mind control operations that they were conducting. But in reality, Richard Helms himself, who was the director of the CIA at the time, when all of this alleged transparency and public, disclosure was allegedly taking place during the church committee hearings in the early 70s, he ordered the destruction of thousands of MKUltra documents and various other, top secret documents of these clandestine operations. So knowing how damning and condemning the available evidence has been over the what was publicly disclosed during the church committee hearings in regard to MKUltra, imagine what we really don't know that was actually, that we'll never basically probably find out in terms of the actual documentation, because they destroyed it all.
Yeah, we know the tip of the iceberg, and the tip is very disturbing. So one can imagine.
Exactly. And so for me, I just think that it's far more plausible, that especially when, I'm just talking about, Sirhan, to make the final note on that point there, because I think it's interesting at the very least. What this document claims is that, allegedly, it was the woman in the polka dot dress serving as the controller who led Sirhan to fire a gun in the pantry, and it suggests a second person shot and killed Kennedy while using Sirhan as a diversion. So it's exactly what I sort of described earlier. And the first time he was under hypnosis, on cue, he says, this is so crazy. On cue from the girl, he went into, quote, range mode, believing he was at a firing range and seeing circles with targets in front of his eyes. He says, quote, I thought that I was at the range more than I was actually shooting at any person, let alone Bobby Kennedy. Sirhan was also quoted saying during interviews with Daniel Brown, that Harvard professor who was a specialist in trauma memory and hypnosis, and he did like a whole session where he had like a theatrical performance sort of set up where he had hypnotized this individual and planted instructions in his mind to where he would be willing to, once given the cue, he would, unbeknownst to him, be triggered into the trance, pull out a briefcase underneath his seat within the theater itself, open it up, grab a gun, and stand up and in the most calm and peaceful of ways, just start opening fire at the individuals on stage. And he claimed that he could successfully do this to an individual unbeknownst to them. And so he held an experiment. And after he successfully walked through this as far as like triggering the individual in the theater who he had told everyone at the beginning of the performance, something will happen during the course of the performance. It just remain calm. And I need you all to understand that you're not in danger, that sort of thing, right? So then this individual in the crowd is triggered throughout the course of the performance, and he goes through with it. He pulls out the gun with the blanks and he starts firing, at the individuals on stage. Then he calmly puts the gun back into the briefcase, puts it back under the seat, and he just goes back to normal, like nothing happened. And so Dan Brown then brings him to his office, like the next day or whenever it was, and he presents the video evidence of what he did during the performance, and he asks him going into it, "Hey, do you remember? How did the performance go? Like that type of thing?" And he explains, it went off without a hitch, right? Like nothing happened. He didn't remember that taking place. And then obviously Dan Brown presents the video evidence and he's like shocked to his core that he was legitimately hypnotized and unbeknownst to him, he was planted with this suggestible, a set of instructions that he followed to a T and with no memory of it. And so that was very interesting because it was just kind of like a more it was reinforcing what everyone, because the context of why he went through that sort of experiment was to lend credibility to the Sirhan Manchurian hypnotized sort of alternative theory.
Yeah,
so
Leonardo DiCaprio, remember that movie Inception? That's the whole concept of that film.
But I'm telling you, man, it's
just crazy.
It is, and it gets far worse than that. And I know we mentioned Waco earlier, and how I didn't realize there was a connection to mind control at Waco that was far more than just them utilizing the sophisticated, mind control methods as what did they call them? There was this specific technology that they were utilizing that wasn't only just clearly the psychological warfare aspect of the slaughtering the rabbits and the Buddhist chanting and things of that nature, but it was far more sinister than that. It was basically it was a part of their resonance, like frequency resonance. I forget what exactly the advanced technique was referred to as, but either way, Paul Wiltshire is an investigative journalist, and he's a reporter who was a part of sort of this congressional investigation and this judiciary committee as well that was kind of looking into the October surprise whenever George Bush Sr. was leveraging, against it was sort of against Jimmy Carter, right, in a certain way. But in reality, it was basically the hostage crisis that they were negotiating behind the scenes so they could have a political victory as the October surprise. And it would apparently, in their minds, it would push them forward. And as far as just, they would get a sort of just public perception victory just before the election that would help potentially, just give them the sort of victory, in terms of just beating Jimmy Carter and taking control of the presidential administration. So it was sort of just another like covert operation where this individual who spoke to Paul Wiltshire, he basically explained that he was a covert operative who was working for the CIA, and that he was the pilot who flew George Bush Sr. and these various CIA operatives, and even like I believe it was William Colby, one of the directors of the CIA, and far more than that, but flew them to London to have these negotiations with the hostage crisis and all of this. And then he allegedly flew George Bush Sr. back and all. It is very strange, but still, what they claim happened is that apparently, and Paul Wiltshire himself claims that he knows. So do you know Danny Casolaro and Danny Casolero's Octopus? There's a recent new documentary that was published not too long ago on Netflix, and it sort of seemed to me like a limited hangout, but it's a window into Iran-Contra, and Danny Casolaro was very much on the case, and he followed this investigation. He was essentially like they called him a tech journalist, right? Because he was much more just his beat was essentially Silicon Valley and the rising tech industry at the time, and he was very much just reporting on a lot of the different tech, just the various companies that were kind of forming and attempting to create monopolies and move forward in this way. So he was reporting on these various system softwares that were being, manufactured and things of that nature. And he found out about this scandal that had to do with the Promise software, right? And it was essentially, it was this state subsidized case management software, but it was far more sinister than that. It was actually it was a system software that was then basically, it was essentially in the most underhanded way, the government in place gained control of the software and then tweaked it, like illegally, provided a back door into this software on the Cabazon Indian Reservation, allegedly is where this happened. And so this gave them an end around back then they provided this system management software, case management software. Not only was it then implemented, all over the country in the U.S., it was then sold to international governments, right? And so basically what it became was this end around for intelligence operatives and the intelligence apparatus to gain access, yes, to a legitimate built-in backdoor that would be implemented voluntarily by the governments that it had been sold to. In bad faith for that purpose specifically. And so it was very interesting when you look into there's a lot of people that went missing and end up dead in regard to that investigation. And Danny Casolaro is one of them. And he essentially was being tipped off by all these various individuals who were clandestine operatives. And then also I think he was lured into position and effectively they suicided him when he was about to, what he thought he was going to get. What he claimed was he would be delivered the head of the octopus on a platter. That was where he was heading. And it was basically all to do with Iran-Contra and the drug smuggling operations that were being conducted to provide financial, black budget funds for, these various covert operations that were not being congressionally approved, clearly. And they wanted to keep it outside of the public record, obviously. And that was another intention of utilizing Iran-Contra for that reason. But it turns out there's far more to Iran-Contra than just drug smuggling and arms trafficking, because I think they were dealing in what they claimed there were.
That's how they generated the funds.
Exactly. They claimed there were esoteric weapons that they were testing on the Cabazon Indian Reservation in California, and that they were essentially using the Indians as slave labor at the time, and that it was a major covert operation where they were flying in illegal Mexican immigrants to cook methamphetamine on the reservation, and it was far more than just that. They're, single engine planes just flying in. It was like the Berry Seal, Mena, Arkansas connection, but in California. It was a nationwide, and honestly, it crossed international borders, but it was a nationwide drug trafficking operation. And it was far more, I think, people don't realize the domestic hubs in place that have a major intelligence footprint involved in facilitating the distribution throughout the country. And that's another reason why you have so many of these greenlit operations in various places that seem to resurface so often.
Yeah,
it's
Dollar
fascinating
General
stuff.
and Family Dollar. You got one on every corner. I wouldn't be surprised if they're involved.
Right. Honestly.
There's a new one popping up every day.
Right. But honestly, man, it's very crazy what this guy had to say. Paul Wiltshire, the investigator, he said he knew as much as Danny Casolaro, because Danny Casolaro was then murdered, obviously, for prying into this sort of clandestine domestic, well, not domestic, but international octopus. Its tentacles reach into the darkest clandestine corners of intelligence. Like he was realizing that this, I believe that this is far smaller as far as the usual suspects involved. It's a small community that can kind of rely on each other to coexist and facilitate these operations. And if you're ever overexposed, they will hang you out to dry. And that's just the bottom line. And you know that going in. As a spook, you're supposed to be a ghost, right? You're not supposed to leave a footprint. And if you leave a traceable footprint, you will be hung and crucified and burned at the stake for public perception purposes. And therefore they will claim you acted alone, the sole perpetrator. Oh my gosh, it would never be a larger network that clearly facilitates. Yeah. When in reality,
high reward, but there's high risk, and they tell you that up front. Yeah, you can make millions, billions of dollars and have everything you ever wanted, man. But if you screw up, you're dead. What do you say?
Isn't that crazy?
You want the job?
It's crazy. Right. Exactly. I mean, there's a flight manifest that this covert operative provided to Paul Wiltshire, and it's just mind-boggling to me that none of this. His name was Gunter Russbacher, the covert operative. That was, what had happened. He had been exposed. He was concerned about, obviously, being murdered. He claimed that his other intelligence, obviously members of intelligence that he was working alongside of in these covert operations, were coming up dead. And he was very concerned because he had taken a criminal charge and was trying to, he was going to play along and remain quiet and silent until other members of the organization were coming up dead. And then he wanted to go on the record and at the very least attempt to provide himself with some sort of protection by revealing his role. And so he hits up Paul Wiltshire, who, again, he's a part of this judiciary committee, like this strange investigative committee that was formed to investigate the October surprise, which was all about the hostage crisis and with Iran, right? Which is just, it's crazy because that's been relived over time, even recently, right? As far as Iranian hostages, or American hostages in Iran. And in the current administration, it's just very interesting how many of these methods are replayed because I think they were very effective to begin with. But anyway, so the point being here is that this Paul Wiltshire, he says, I know just as much, if not more, than Danny Casolaro, and then he's effectively found dead. It's crazy because his body's moved. He's brought to his own apartment and placed onto the toilet, and essentially, like, none of the, as far as, it was absolutely ridiculous to claim this was a suicide because clearly the body had been moved from the original place of death, which was another aspect of his death and the investigation into his death. But again, the convenient timing of it, because he pens this report called the Wiltshire Report, and he sends it to the current, at the time, the Attorney General Janet Reno, who presided over the Waco siege and helped cover up the Oklahoma City bombing, obviously, and the sheep dipped operatives that were conducting that ridiculous operation, right? Like that was another. It was Gunther Strassmeyer, right? Who was. He was like entirely brought over because he had an extreme background, just a very high level background in intelligence operations. He had legitimately gone and trained on a kibbutz in Israel, and it's very strange, his connections to German intelligence. And then he's brought over. His father was an elite in the German government, and so he was brought over by Al Gore, right? Who's the vice president at the time. And he's brought over directly on request by Al Gore to help facilitate this domestic operation that would be greenlit in Oklahoma City, which happened to be the Alfred P. Murrah building, which, that federal building, obviously it had a nursery in there where a bunch of children were murdered, and some of the witnesses claimed to have seen undetonated charges that had been placed on key points of the building, including underneath the daycare. But all these members of the ATF are tipped off prior to it all. It's just a fascinating thing. But what they had claimed was being housed, and I've never yet been able to confirm this for a fact, but I've heard so many different allegations claiming that the Whitewater investigation was being conducted at the time, I believe is the name of it, and it was investigating the Clintons. Yeah, it was all like this sort of Senate subcommittee had been formed, and they were investigating the Clintons' footprint with Iran-Contra as he was governor in Arkansas. And so a lot of that was being investigated, records were being kept, and they were going to have a legitimate trial, according to many different individuals who were involved at the time. And it turns out that all the records of that investigation had just been moved to the Alfred P. Murrah building, that federal building. And so they were claiming that, and all the undetonated charges, it didn't go off as planned. They wanted to bring the Alfred P. Murrah building to the ground, and essentially later on it would be entirely destroyed and buried, right? Like, we never got to actually, they did that as fast as possible to try and cover up any sort of evidence that could be discovered at the site itself. They allegedly, just like 9/11, they had crews just coming in overnight, just taking out every single last piece of rubble. It goes to show they didn't want any real rigorous investigation to take place. Same thing happened with Sandy Hook. What happened to the structure of that building? It was entirely destroyed, into its own footprint in a way, right? And therefore we couldn't have any resolution to was this an active elementary school? How long prior to the event taking place? Why was there no parking placards in the parking lot? Why, like every single aspect of it seemed like it was staged. Why was there, but hey, I'm just saying that too much of it does fit a pattern recognition playbook. But with David Koresh, what the Paul Wiltshire report claims about him, and this again was penned and sent to Janet Reno, and she later on would claim during one of her re-election campaigns, she would threaten the administration, and she would say, if I don't get my re-election, then I'll blow the lid off of what really happened at Waco, which I found to be a very interesting threat, and especially after this. Because apparently, David Koresh, according to Paul Wiltshire's report, had an extensive CIA background and was a sleeper who had been subjected to extensive CIA mind control training and programming. Now, apparently, Waco was a major center for such CIA mind control experimentation, and even goes back to, they say, prior to World War II, or just after World War II. It became a strategic hub for some of these experimentation operations. And so it actually, Mount Carmel went back long before the Branch Davidians, gained control of a part of the property. and that this was not another one of the sort of domestic operation hubs that intelligence had been utilizing, since the war, and for a lot of the behavioral modification research applications. And apparently, they say Koresh was a sleeper, and that Waco is this major center for the mind control experimentation, but also much of this activity occurred at the CIA's Leadership Management Institute, what was called the LMI in Waco. And it names Salt Lake City, Utah, Provo, Utah, Logan, Utah, Boise, Idaho, and San Francisco, California as other locations, as well as, in terms of the Idaho context and Utah, these are locations that clearly involve, like, let's say the Ted Bundy case is a great example, and so to me, it just goes on to expose these similar CIA sponsored cults, that implicate the Delta Force in being involved, especially in Mount Carmel during the assault, right, on April 19th, the final fiery conclusion, and that basically these Delta Force operatives were sent in to kill David Koresh and 6 other sleepers within the Davidians before setting the fires that burned down Mount Carmel, and that they were given an antidote to apparently counteract the nerve agent and the nerve toxin that had been sprayed into the property itself at Mount Carmel, to essentially leave them paralyzed and unable to, flee or fight back or at any real level. And then the Delta Force were sent in, and they committed the final executions on the specific priority targets, and then they just set the fires to the compound. And that makes all the sense in the world to me, especially considering why there was such there were international intelligence operatives and officials who were there to watch over what looked as if it was just another domestic experimentation, that they were trying to see what would happen, right, with this sort of controlled test group, in this specific environment under these circumstances. How would this legitimately, what would be the interesting results and consequences of a sort of, it's almost like Jonestown, right? You have a population under a certain set of circumstances that you're deliberately trying to socially engineer and control aspects of their minds. It's another
a real life experiment.
Yeah, exactly. It's a real experiment on the ground in real time with human beings as the test subjects, unbeknownst to them, many of them, I think. And that is why it's only 6 of the sort of operatives on, that are sort of in Koresh's inner circle in a way, right? But anyway, to me, that's fascinating, brother. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's just mind blowing how much
that's
people
an
are
rabbit trail too.
Well, yeah. And people are unaware of the origin of Project Monarch as well, and how much it was John DeCamp who wrote the Franklin cover up, right? And he explained that the Monarch project was essentially, it was far more, relevant than people are aware of in terms of, this sort of exploiting this traumatic abuse. And he says that the basic idea was to use the altars of people suffering from DID for specific military and intelligence purposes. But alternate personalities are sort of mainly formed at this relatively young age and only under the most extreme stress. So they essentially, a lot of this was disturbingly, pursued under the guise of various concentration camp experiments during the SS regime, obviously, and it's very interesting. But this is what John DeCamp has to say about the origin of Project Monarch, and how basically it was Michael Aquino who was one of the key operatives who helped run the project. But he says an account of the origin of the Monarch project has been compiled by those who have been debriefing multiple personality disorder child victims, or DID. In Nazi experimentation in World War II, concentration camps were said to have gone beyond simply insane physical tortures. They brainwashed people for military and strategic purposes. He goes on to say that after the war, Alan Dulles and other Western intelligence people brought Nazi doctors out for use in the U.S., and they created a teenage concentration camp, and apparently there was an inmate named Greenbaum. Dr. Green is later what he would be referenced as, who had participated to allegedly save himself and would be brought to the U.S. through Operation Paperclip as well. And he becomes a high-level behavioral modification operative and brainwasher, and is widely represented in brainwashing programs with allegedly a distinctive Kabbalistic magic theme, according to John DeCamp, which definitely caught my eye. And he says the killers in the Nazi camps were themselves trained and organized by psychiatrists and eugenicists, operating from the T4 Bureau. These psychiatrists had long been the pets of white supremacist British and American financier networks. At least some of these Nazi doctors were spirited out of Germany under the supervision of and for Bank of England Governor Montague Norman and Tavistock Institute Director John Rees on behalf of the British government. He says Norman personally, an insane theosophist who had been chief of the pre-war pro-Nazi faction within England, and Rees organized post-war propaganda and continuing psychological warfare activities and created Orwellian groupings within U.S. psychiatry and mental health fields. So, yeah, to me, man, I just think that Monarch is so much more prominent than people are aware of, right? And I just think that it's honestly, it's something that I think people need to really just have more of a well-versed understanding of how these techniques are implemented, right? But hey, man, honestly, I feel like I barely scratched the surface on any of it, and I went a little schizo on you. So I honestly feel if you're interested and would like to, we could kind of like pry down into more specific examples of this and just like prioritize certain cases if you want to do a part 2 or something, and we can actually reinforce some of these what I believe to be very, very credible evidence in terms of just making the case as far as not only, I think we should be able to cover at least a little bit of the Franklin scandal in terms of Paul Benassi because of how often he just resurfaces in many of these different scandals. And then also it'll provide us with an avenue to discuss the induced amnesia aspect, a little bit more of Monarch, because again, it plays perfectly into like the modern context of what was happening in the Epstein network. And we could pry down a little bit because I did want to show to you these crazy allegations made by Jeffrey Epstein's niece. Right. And it would provide us with, again, another window into the Kabbalistic nature of the uninitiated not being willing to engage with what potentially could be the reality here, which is these are ancient philosophical practices and techniques and ritualistic exercises that have been conducted for generations, and I just feel like we can legitimately bridge that gap between just what seemed to be theoretical, conspiratorial, extraordinary allegations to a legitimate, what I view as just something that is very much proven out, utilizing the corroborative evidence. Exactly. And that gives us a window into, I believe, the true power paradigm at play. So,
no, dude, anyway, I'd love to, honestly, because awesome. I know I've been quiet on this episode. Anybody that listens to my show, I'm usually a jabberbox, but you've had me intrigued, and this is, like I said, this is not a rabbit hole that I've went down. So I'm trying to soak all this in, and I know I'm kind of a nerd. I dive into a lot of stuff, so I'm sure a lot of the listeners are unfamiliar with this, and I'm sure you've sparked their curiosity, to say the least. So I would love to talk with you some more and take a deeper dive on this stuff.
Thank you, buddy. That way I won't, because unfortunately, occasionally I'll take for granted the details of just because I've been aware of certain things for, will unfortunately present things as if others are aware of certain aspects of the case.
I'm guilty of it too.
Right.
Right over it. Yeah. Like everybody knows that. No, everybody's not as weird as you, Justin.
Right. And that's legitimately how I feel. So I apologize to the audience if it wasn't quite as palatable as I was hoping, but I promise you next time around, I will. I'll try and make sure that I'm much more of a smooth transition into certain topics, so we can.
Everybody's too rough on themselves, man. I think this was a good discussion, and the stuff that I didn't know about. I mean, I even was like, hey, now what is that for those that's not familiar? Me included. but dude, I appreciate your time, man. You're a well-researched dude, and you connect dots, and that's why we connect and get along so well and hit it right off at Bro Grove. But man, for anybody that missed the opening or, was doing laundry or dishes and maybe was out of the room at the beginning of the show, just let everybody know the little information, like where can they find you, man, your website, podcast, if they want to dive into some more of your fascinating research, man.
Thank you, man. And honestly, I have to say, I can't thank you enough for just being willing to have me on the show and have this conversation. But I'll try not to, I'm very critical of myself, but at the same time, I run my mouth a little too much. So I feel like at a certain level, I was almost, it was almost kind of a filibuster in a way at certain points. So I'll try and talk slower and not be but either way, I just have to say, meeting you at Bro Grove, man, like you are such a good storyteller. Like it inspired me. I thought it's just beautiful to listen to you explain certain things and provide details of various stories that you've experienced and have been told, or it just like, it's very important and I think an unmastered skill in modern times, where people aren't quite as interested in that sort of, just like, I think it's such a viable tool to presenting information. And if you have the ability to kind of like just capture, you just capture people's attention, because you caught my attention. It was such an appealing way to kind of go through describing an event that you experienced. And anyway, I thought it was very important, and so many people lack that ability these days. And I just wanted to tell you that it's something that I very much appreciate and I admire in you. So yeah, thank you, dude, for being willing to have me on, and also for being willing to have the conversations and be interested in the certain things that you research that are far more, interesting to certain people who might in certain ways be unwilling to even venture into that territory. And I think that we have to reject that concept of like undermining our credibility because we are presenting something that could potentially just be a theoretical opinion or where we lie, and based on the various evidence that we've been. I'm not saying that's what you do, but I'm just saying that people need to venture into the unknown in a way that is far more objective. And I think you are doing that. And that is something that it's just, it's very unique, and I appreciate it very much. So thank you again, brother. And
that's one of my themes too. I tell people, I usually end the show, I tell them, hey, the difference between the known and the unknown is the journey.
That's awesome. That is beautiful. That is beautiful. But I have to say, I hit it off with you instantly at Bro Grove. So I would love to do this again. I think we'll only, improve in our dynamic, obviously, over time. And I usually get more comfortable with people as I go. But I do. I have to say thank you again. And anybody who's interested in my research or have heard anything I've ever done and it resonated with you, the underclasspodcast.com / it's patreon.com/the underclass podcast is really the best place to support me. And at least there, there's at least an incentive in place that even at the lowest level, the $3 tier, you'll gain access to my paywalled show with Brad Binkley from the Propaganda Report and Sam Tripoli from Tinfoil Hat. And we do a show called Whatever This Is. And it's a lot of fun. We just kind of shoot the shit a little bit, but also, just discuss things that we find very interesting and important and under acknowledged in certain ways, and in the sort of just news cycle and how over, honestly, man, like the unprecedented level of the speed, right, of this current news cycle is just, we're talking, there are stories that we should be prioritizing and focusing on, and they're just lost in the cycle, right, in just a matter of days. And to me, it's unnatural. It's something that, it definitely, I think, just as far as the human condition, we weren't necessarily ever meant to be
consume this much content.
Exactly, to information at such an extraordinary level. But anyway, yeah, I just have to say, man, Bro Grove was a dream, and thank you again, man. And if anybody does appreciate it, the Underclass Podcast, you can pretty much find most of my interviews as well. But yeah, I appreciate you, brother. Thank you again, man.
No, man, I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. I tell people all the time, time is life's most valuable asset. You can get more of everything, but the one thing you can't get more of is time. So that's life's most valuable asset. So I appreciate you spending it with me, man. But guys, Absolutely. If you enjoyed that, dude, be sure to check out Austin. As you see, this dude is a well-researched wealth of knowledge, and he's just overall good dude. One of my gifts is I have discernment, man. I can look at somebody, hang out with them for 2 minutes and tell you what kind of person they are, and Austin is good people. So be sure to check him out and support him, man. And hey guys, just like I said earlier, the difference between the known and the unknown is the journey. So good journey, guys.